We're live? Oh, look at that. We are live. Hello. Welcome. I'm going to go ahead and start because I'm going to try to do about an hour and a half, 2-hour presentation in 45 minutes. So I will apologize ahead of time. I am going to be speaking fairly quickly, but I am of the impression that you guys have access to this afterwards. So if you do miss taking some notes, I think you guys have access to it. Also, I'm here for the rest of the day because I've got something going on tonight down here. So I'm going to be literally hanging outside in the common area. So if you guys have questions, you want to come by and pick my brain, feel free, because I'm not doing anything but sitting there until somebody comes and talks to me. So I do have my books with me. Matter of fact, I will go ahead and do my commercials really quickly. So there's over 100 hours of my podcast now available. You can find it anywhere podcasts are available, Releasing Your Inner Dragon. It's also on YouTube if you want to watch us while we're actually doing the podcast. So that's available to you. I do have 3 creative writing books. I know a lot of you have the Dynamic Story Creation and the Better Writing Through Stronger Narrative, but the Ultimate Guide to Show Don't Tell just dropped this year. Ironically, this is the class that I'm doing. So I will have those out after this if you guys want to get whatever. Dynamic story creation basically is the theory behind writing. It focuses on theme, what makes a story, and so on and so forth. Better writing is the base of writing. It's everything you need to know to make solid prose. And then obviously Show Don't Tell is how to be a more immersive writer. If you like the way I teach, you can go to drakeu.com. I do have, for the next 30 days, if you use the code PERK50, you can get 50% off my big package, which is kind of about a 43-episode class. I do have these down there, so you don't have to remember the code. I have some handouts down there with my business cards, so you can always just grab one, and it has the discount code on there. And then just a few months ago, I launched a writing platform. If you really want to get serious about your writing, you can work with me every single week and be in a group of very dedicated people that are all striving to get better at writing. So it's writersroom.us. We do monthly critique sessions, weekly critique sessions, weekly development sessions, weekly writing sessions. I do classes in it. We do all sorts of exercises and a whole bunch of stuff. So if you really want to be with a very good community of people who are all working together to improve their craft, I highly recommend you check it out. If you go to writersroom.us/20Books, you can actually sign up for 50% off through February of next year. All right, so I start off all my class with a quote. This one's from Anton Chekhov. "Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light off broken glass." Show Don't Tell is the second class I ever created about 20 years ago. The biggest reason why I created it is when I used to, not anymore, but early in my career when I wasn't as busy as I am now, I used to tell people when I was speaking, man, send me a page or two, I'll critique whatever you want, it's fine. And my number one critique to people was, you're very telly, you need to be more showy. And so everybody that I would critique that, they'd be like, oh man, thank you so much, that's awesome, that's what I needed. And then a month would go by, they'd send me another sample back. It'd be the same thing, but rewritten. And I would read it and I would go, so I see you're using different words, but this is very telly. You need to be more showy. And they were like, oh, right, you mentioned that. And then about a month later, I'd get the same thing back in and I would look at it and I would go, you have no idea what I mean by being a showy writer, do you? And they're like, nope, not a clue. And I get it, it's hard. We're using the same words, whether you're telling or showing. So really, to understand showing is to understand thinking differently about writing. One of the things I say with all my classes is if you want to get the most out of my teaching, you have to understand you are learning a new language. Yes, it's based in English, but creative writing is not speaking English. It is completely different. And so that's really the trick to understanding how to be a showy writer as opposed to being a telly writer. It's just thinking different. So the basic difference between showing and telling is that with telling, the writer is merely cataloging actions, feelings, emotions, and events. Showing paints an image that allows the reader's imagination to create a scene and place the reader in the middle of it. That is the nugget. When you are telling, you are just listing off actions, feelings, emotions, and events. You are not allowing the reader to experience those actions, feelings, emotions, and events. And so you have to think different as a storyteller. Prose is a very unique way of information dissemination, of communication. And if you really want to be immersive, you have to just change the way you're thinking about how you're giving that information to the readers. So let's look at the 12 things that I think are the most important things to being a better showy writer. So thinking point one is use stronger verbs. Now, this does not make you a showy writer. However, I don't think people give verbs as much credit as they need. Verbs are literally the lifeblood of your story. They are the most important word of every single sentence you write. So using strong verbs does not mean you're showy. However, weak verbs definitely are doing you no justice. So if we wrote the line, Drake hit the wall, everyone can see that. If we wrote the line, Drake struck the wall, everyone can see that. But do you see the exact same scene? Or has things changed? What about if I write Drake whacked the wall? Has the action changed yet again? Or Drake bashed the wall? The beautiful thing about writing in American prose is that we literally have a language that was created by stealing from every other language for the last 1,000 years. We have 30 words that all mean the exact same thing, but each one evokes different emotions, brings different visuals with them. Verbs are the key to everything in writing, period. Now, you don't want to be a thesaurus. You want to be smart about what you're doing. If you were to write Drake percussed the wall, I would put your book down because that is dumb. I mean, unless there's some type of drum wall and it's some type of magic spell or whatever, I'll go with that. But be smart with what you're doing because each one of them do bring in different things with them. If we wrote, Drake put his gun in his holster, turned and walked from the room, everyone can see that. If we just change the verbs, Drake slammed his gun in his holster, turned and stormed from the room. It's a completely different scene, 100%. That's why verbs are the most important word in every sentence you write. Thinking point two, kill your adverbs. You hear this all the time. And some people like to fight about this, where they're like, oh no, there's nothing wrong with adverbs. Adverbs are always crappy tally writing, always. You can't get around it. Now, I use an adverb every page or two. Sometimes I'll use two on a single page because sometimes they're the right word to use. They're always tells. You can't avoid that. There's no way to. So yes, all writers frequently tend to excessively overuse adverbs, which is mournfully sad, as most adverbs can be entirely cut from your thoughtfully thought out manuscript, because many adverbs are repetitively redundant. That's the thing about most adverbs that you're going to find if you really start paying attention to them. You will start realizing, wow, that's a stupid way to write this, because that's what a lot of adverbs do. You just don't realize what you're doing. So like you might write, be quiet, Drake screamed loudly. There's no other way to scream. Like the screamed, the verb comes with loud as a part of its package. So if I was to write, be quiet, Drake screamed, you don't see anything different in your head. You've just wasted a word. The audience is going to picture the exact same thing. Same thing with keeping low, Drake quickly raced to the other side of the room. Versus keeping low, Drake raced to the other side of the room. Raced as a verb already comes with it the fact that it's happening quickly. So it doesn't change in your head. So that's one way people overuse adverbs, is they just use them redundantly. Or they'll do something like this. When the plane tilted sideways, Drake was thrown completely out the open door. Wow, thank you. I was worried that Drake left a leg in the plane when he was thrown out. Just thrown out the open door. You don't see anything different between these two. And if I'm not going to show something different to my audience, I'm not going to waste a word. I've got too much to do, and I've got too many. I'm already writing, multi-million words sagas, so I'm good. I don't need to add extra words for no reason whatsoever. But those that aren't annoyingly redundant are very often added to significantly strengthen a particularly weak verb, which is especially dumb because not only are you totally adding extra words for no benefit, you are plainly showing off your lack of creativity as a writer. So another reason why a lot of people use adverbs is because they're using the wrong verb. They're using a weak verb. And so they need to add the adverb to strengthen the verb. In those last examples, the verb did its job, and the adverb added nothing. If we were to write, Drake moved stealthily through the underbrush, the verb moved doesn't bring with it any type of stealthiness or creepiness or quietness. So we have to add an ly adverb to strengthen the crappy choice that we made in the verb, as opposed to Drake crept through the underbrush. There are verbs that can do that job. Drake angrily looked at the broken vase. Again, looked as a verb does not bring any anger with it. So we have to add a crappy telly adverb to strengthen that, as opposed to Drake glared at the broken vase, which comes with it the emotion that we would like for the reader to experience. Verbs are vitally important. They're everything in prose. Drake danced gracefully across the stage. No, he doesn't, but I like the sentence. However, danced does not imply anything, as opposed to Drake glided across the stage. Most of the time, if you're not using an ly adverb in a redundant way, you're doing it because you picked the wrong verb. It's that simple. And most of them can be cut. Again, I use one about every page or two, because sometimes we just want to, sometimes the door just slowly closes. It's fine, because that's what it's doing, and that's all it needs to do. We don't need to expand upon it any more than that. While you're addressing those silly adverbs in your lovely prose, go ahead and cut any ugly adjectives that also tend to get overused. The crowd was in awe of Drake's lovely advice. Again, there's no added benefit to this. There's no added oomph to the visual scene for the audience if you just cut that out. Drake gave a friendly nod to the child, as opposed to Drake gave a smile to the child. Like, if nod does not bring with it what you need it to give to the audience, then find something else. Find a different noun in this case that will give that to the sentence. The friendly dog wagged its tail as it approached Drake. Do angry, vicious dogs wag their tail when they approach somebody? No. So that's redundant, because if you're already describing and showing a friendly dog, telling the reader that it is also friendly is just babying your reader and treating them like kindergartners, which I don't like to do. Thinking point 3, active voice versus passive voice. So we're going to get grammatical here. We're going to learn active versus passive voice. I love academia. I love college professors. They make a lot of money because they really, really earn their money. They're brilliant people. And so I don't understand why people have a problem with this, because the rule to it is so easy to understand. In an active voice sentence, the subject is doing the action. In a passive voice sentence, the target of the subject is promoted to the subject position. Now, everybody in the room knows how to do active versus passive voice, right? Yeah, this is why I hate academia, and I do not think that they actually earn their money. I think they're way overpaid, and I think professors' number one goal is to make you think they're smarter than them. Make them think you're smarter than you. Sorry, went the other way. And their second job, maybe, is to teach you something. This is stupid. Nothing gets promoted in a sentence. It's really a dumb way to say it. And it also overcomplicates it. This is actually very simple. Every single one of you will walk out of here knowing exactly what active voice versus passive voice is and how to do it. Let's go back to 3rd grade. Now, to understand active versus passive voice, you have to diagram. And I know the demigod of diagramming is a terrifying beast. But the cool thing is 95% of everything a writer needs to know in diagramming comes from just knowing how to do 2 things. You must be able to pull out your subject and your action. That is it. All those other jukes and jives and marks and dashes and circles and all of that are worthless to a professional prose writer. But you need to be able to pull out your subject and your action. So what is the subject in this sentence? Dog. What is our action? Oh, I skipped it. So bit. I gave it to you. So the dog is our subject, bit is our action. The boy is the object of the sentence. We're not going to worry about him. Is the subject doing the action? Is the dog doing the biting? Then you're in active voice. If the subject is doing the action, that's all you need to know. You're in active voice. If we wrote this sentence different, if we wrote it, the boy was bitten by the dog, same sentence, same information, same everything, what's our subject now? The boy. What's our action? Was bitten. Is the boy doing the action? That's passive voice. That's all you need to know. If the subject is no longer doing the action, then you are in passive voice. As an American prose writer, you should write less than 2% of your entire manuscript in passive voice. I write less than 0.1%. Why? Why would I even want to write 1%? Because, I mean, look at the two. Which is more dynamic and interesting for the reader? The dog bit the boy, or the boy was bitten by the dog? Which is more exciting to read? Active voice, always. So why would I ever write a passive voice sentence? Because I said I write 0.1%. Well, you only need two things to have a complete sentence. You need a subject and an action. Orcs stink. That's a complete sentence. However, if I need to write a sentence and I need to withhold information, either the POV does it because I write in true limited or deep third, whatever you want to say, my narrating character is the one telling the story, so if they don't know something, I can't give it in prose. I just can't. They don't know it. So I could write this sentence, the boy was bitten. This is a complete sentence. It's in passive voice. But if the boy is my POV and the boy does not know who bit him, then this is the way I'm going to write it. Because who bit him? A dog, a spider, his sister? We don't know, nor do you, Mr. Reader. I'm not going to tell you. You're just stuck without the information. So every single piece of passive voice in everything that I write is there on purpose, by design, because I want it to be there. Never by accident. Which is another reason why you can't write the way you talk, because we talk very, very passively. I'm up here on stage talking with a lot of passive voice because that's how we communicate verbally. But that is not how we communicate through prose. Thinking point 4, don't filter. Filtering is another thing you need to know how to diagram sentences for, but again, all you need to do is pull out your subject and your action. Filtering is the worst thing you can do to your story. It rots it silently from the inside. Most aspiring writers have never even heard this term, but in my opinion, it's the number one thing that kills most stories. Writing prose is about control. It's about manipulation. I manipulate my readers. That is my job. I manipulate you to see what I want you to see. I manipulate you to feel what I want you to feel. I manipulate you to learn lessons that I want to teach you. That is how I do it, or that is what I'm doing. How I do it, one of the ways, is sentence structure. How I formulate my sentences is vitally important because I'm the one in control. When you write a sentence with a subject, you are forcing the reader to focus on that subject. So, filtering has to do with what you want the reader to focus on. Again, we're going back to diagramming, but it's vitally important that you construct your sentences in a way that forces the reader to focus on what you want them to focus on. So if I wrote, I could feel the demon's hot breath licking the back of my neck. That sounds like a really good sentence, doesn't it? Yeah, it's garbage. What is the subject of this sentence? I. What is the action? Could feel. Is that worth a crap in this sentence? Is that what I want my readers looking at? I want my readers looking at me while I'm experiencing something? No. The demon's hot breath licked the back of my neck. Your readers are going to feel that. They're going to get a tingle down their spine because they're experiencing what the character's experiencing. What's my subject here? The demon's hot breath. What's my action? Licked. That's the cool part of the sentence. That is what we want the reader focusing on, not I could feel. So understanding how to diagram your subject and your action will show you whether you're filtering or not. We don't want to filter, for the most part. Drake watched the rabid dog creep closer. Why am I looking at Drake as he's watching something that I should be watching myself? The rabid dog crept closer. Drake could smell the wretched stench of death. The wretched stench of death attacked Drake's nose. I see the knife lying on the table and pick it up. You can also do stuff like, with sentence structure, emphasize things. The knife lies on the table. Hey, reader, see the knife lying on the table? You see it? I pick it up. You see me picking it up? Yeah. Sentence structure is how I force my reader to do what I want them to do, to focus on what I want them to focus on. Drake wondered if he should call Dylan today. Another trick for getting rid of filtering is dialogue. In this case, I used inner monologue, which is just dialogue inside the character's head. I wonder if I should call Dylan today. I'm still filtering here, but it's more personal. Now the reader feels connected to the character as opposed to just looking at Drake as he's wondering about something. So avoid filtering, because it really also stifles creativity. Going back to the wondered, Drake wondered what it would feel like to fall to his death. When we get into this a little deeper, I'm going to say this a lot, to turn a tell into a show is actually very, very simple. You just have to ask a question. Now that question is going to change depending on what tell that you're doing. In this case, it's an internal thing. It's an internal mental thing. So I would ask the question, what do you actually think about when you're wondering what it feels like to fall to your death? Whatever you answer, that's the show every time, every single time. Drake's imagination ran wild, the wind rushing past him, whipping his clothing into a tangled frenzy, the sight of the ground racing up to meet him, its sole desire to crush every bone in his body, the terror and ecstasy of his last few breaths of life. Oh, that is one way that it feels like to wonder what it feels like to fall to your death. Also, Drake's back, crap, crazy. I'll try to keep it clean. So I've given character insight as well, as opposed to stifling my creativity and writing the first line. I'm giving my reader more depth into the character because I'm showing them what he's thinking about as opposed to telling them. Words like, these are all red flags. I'm not gonna go through the whole list, but anytime, it's a lot of visual stuff. You know, we do have the could and can. We do have the thinking stuff like decide and experienced. Feel and felt are bad. For my students, I actually tell them you're not allowed to use feel or felt in your prose, period. And I mean narration. If a character said, but then he said that I should do this, that's great, that's fine. We talk like that all the time. I have no problem using it in dialogue, but never in narration, because always a tell. But also a lot of visual things. Watched, looked, saw, heard, any of the senses. If you're doing that, you're filtering. It's just the way it is. However, you don't always want to not use it, because sometimes we want the reader to look at the character. That's the important part of the moment. I'm sorry, Drake, but we can't be together any longer, Dylan said as he stood. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I watched as Dylan slowly walked away, my heart screaming. Do I care if the reader's looking at Dylan in this scene? He's not the important part. I am. I'm in pain. Reader, look at me. I'm the one that is suffering and you will look at. Screw Dylan. He's already dumped me. So, yes, you will want to filter some, but you'll do it on purpose. You'll do it because the reader needs to focus on the character. Now, a lot of times people will be like, well, wait a minute now. If I don't say Drake watched the ghost float down the hall, how will the reader know that it's Drake who watched the ghost float down the hall? Well, if you're writing in a limited POV, which you should be, that is the way of the world today. So you're either writing in first person or, I know you think you're writing in third person limited, you're actually not. You're writing in something called free under discourse, but that is a fight for another time. Then it's your character who's telling the story, not you. And if you've established that, then everything that is seen, heard, felt, smelt, thought is being done by your narrating character. So that's why I don't have to write Drake watched the ghost walk down the hall, and I can just write the ghost, floated down the hall, not walked. Because I've already established that Drake's my POV character. So everything that is described is coming from him. I don't need to keep pointing him out to the reader and having him sit between the reader and what the cool things are that I want them to experience in the scene. Thinking point 5, don't tell your readers how to react. Your job as a creative writer is to paint a mental picture for your reader, not expect them to do your job for you. In a totally unexpected move, the monster jumped at Drake. Again, to turn a tell into a show, which is what this is, we ask a question. In this case, it's a visual question. What does it look like when a monster unexpectedly jumps at somebody? Whatever your answer is, and there's millions of ways to write it, those are all going to be shows, every single one of them. Drake took another step back, but the monster didn't move. Letting out a shuddered breath, he took a deep, calming breath. I just need to keep moving away, and I'll be fine, he thought. His eyes flew open as the creature lunged, claws bared. Oh, that's what it looks like when a monster. That's one way. Again, there's a million ways to do it. Unexpectedly, suddenly, abruptly, out of the blue, without warning, surprising all at once. All of these things are just red flags. If you're writing these, you're expecting the reader to do your job for you instead of you doing your job and showing the reader what is going on in your story. Thing point 6, don't fear emotions. Emotions are the fertile ground in which to sow the show. Unfortunately, it is very easy to slip into telling when it comes to emotions. Emotions are the way to the reader's heart. If you can immerse the reader into what your narrator is experiencing emotionally, your job as an author is half done. Your readers want to feel what your character is feeling. That's why they're there. When you slip into telling with emotions, you're really doing your reader a disservice. We don't want to tell the reader what the characters in our story feel, and we want to show it to them. It's the reason why, like I said, feel and felt are off the table. Let them experience these emotions for themselves. The monster jumped for the bushes, and Drake was scared. Another way you can tell if you're telling is, can you turn it into a math equation? We don't do math. I'm very bad at math. I'm much better at English. Drake equals scared. That's a math equation. That is a tell every time. But let's look at this. Let's go back to what I talked about, verbs. Is scared a strong verb, or are there better verbs? Maybe we can fix this by going, Drake was terrified. But it still is Drake equals terrified. So therefore, it is still a math equation, it's still a tell. Well, what about was? In this case, it's also a verb. It's a linking verb. Maybe we could write, Drake felt terrified. That's much better, isn't it? No, it's the exact same thing. You're still just telling. Again, to turn this into a show, we ask a question. Now, this is an internal emotion. So we ask the question, what does it feel like to be scared? Whatever you come up with, there's millions and millions of answers. It's always going to be the show. The monster jumped from the bushes, and the blood drained from Drake's face. Whatever, we can describe it. The monster jumped from the bushes, the blood drained from Drake's face. We could divide them into 2 sentences. The monster the blood drained from Drake's face as the monster jumped from the bushes. Depends on what you want the reader to focus on. What are you doing in the moment? Notice those are 3 different ways to construct this exact same sentence. And each one of them are going to force the reader to see something a little bit different and focus on something a little bit different. But they're all shows as opposed to tells. And when it comes to something like tear all your emotions, there's millions of ways to do them. I struggle to breathe, Drake struggled to breathe, my eyes bulge, Drake's eyes bulge. Tremors racked my body, tremors racked Drake's bodies. The sensation of needles ran up my spine, Drake's throat clamped shut. A scream ripped from my lungs, sweat beaded on Drake's palm. I backed away, escaped being the only thought in my head. Like literally, there's just millions and millions and millions of ways. It's limitless. Just ask the question, and whatever you answer is going to be the show every time. Now, do keep in mind that there is a difference between your narrating character, if you're writing in a liminal POD, which you should be, and your secondary characters. You are the protagonist of your story. When you look around the room, you have no idea what anyone else in this room is thinking. That is the same way you write. Your character is the character that the reader is in their head. So if John is my secondary character and I wrote something like bile rose in the back of John's throat, well, unless Drake walked over and stuck his tongue down John's throat, which probably is a different story, Drake's not going to know that there's bile rising in the back of John's throat if he's a secondary character. So do pay attention to that, because you can write some head hopping in there if you're not paying attention. So what can we do with our secondary and tertiary characters? Very simple. Just like you and the rest of the world, the only way you know what everyone else is thinking around you and doing is by what they say and what they do. So you're in your POV's head. Everyone else, you can only describe them through what they say and what they do, period. That's all you get. Otherwise, you're head hopping. Head hopping is bad. Thing point 7, bland linking verbs. We already talked about this a little bit. Was, were, has had, are, is, feel, felt. The monster was coming toward me and I felt terrified. I had but one choice, the cliff, though I knew I wasn't fast enough. There was simply too much ground between me and safety. I've seen stuff like this written billions of times. It is very telly. It is not as exciting as it could be. Now, does it mean that it's completely garbage and not exciting? No, not necessarily. But I don't want to put out meh stuff. I want my readers blown away by what I'm writing. So instead, I might write something like, the monster stepped closer, my entire body shook, and I couldn't breathe. My mind raced as my eyes darted around. There, the cliff, a sliver of hope I could grasp. But could I outrun this nightmare? Now you're actually involved in the situation. You're actually immersed with the character. You're experiencing at the same time as them. Again, that's what readers want. They want to experience your story. They don't want to sit around a campfire and have you tell them your story. That is not what they're there for. Thinking point 8, dialogue can cut info dumps. Dialogue in a novel is not simply your characters talking with each other. If you are writing dialogue as if it's just your characters talking to each other, you are wasting a third to half the words in your novel. Dialogue is the absolute hardest thing to write when it comes to prose because it isn't your characters talking to each other. You have to grow the characters, move the plot, move the story. All the things you do in narration, you have to do in dialogue as well. However, unlike narration, it has to have the illusion that it is just characters talking to each other. And that is actually very, very difficult. The reason why I got into script writing initially was to practice that. Because when you write a script, you have to introduce your characters, move your plot, get your theme in, move the story, all of it through nothing but dialogue, because we're not allowed to write narration in scripts. If you've ever read one, they're really horrible to read. However, it can be a way for the writers to show more of their story. It can give insight into your characters. Sally was a 20-year company woman. Drake knew she was frustrated, but he also knew she wouldn't roll over on their boss just for being an idiot. She had a conscience. So I'm just info dumping on the reader. Now, this is an actual piece. I've changed the name, but this was actually from the very first book I ever book doctored like 20 years ago. In this scene, this is like chapter 7, 8, 9, whatever. This is the first time that Sally was introduced. So I know why the writer did it, because he's like, well, I have to do that. I have to tell the reader this stuff or they won't understand Sally. Okay, but you don't have to tell it to them. Because it's an office scene, and Drake is already talking to Sally in this scene. It's a dialogue scene. So use dialogue. Once again, I had to cover for our imbecile boss. Sally sighed and plopped in her chair. But I couldn't let things go forward his way, Drake. You know it would have cost the company millions. I just wish I could tell the board and not feel guilty about ruining his career. Literally every single piece of information in the first paragraph, except for one, is in the second paragraph. The only thing that's not in it is the 20-year company. We don't know exactly how long she's been there. But she's a tertiary character. She's in this one scene and never in the scene again. Do we really need to know that she's been at this office for exactly 20 years? Does that have any relevance to the story? Probably not. But look at everything else. Drake knew she was frustrated. Well, she's plopping in chairs. Like, that shows her frustration. Wouldn't roll over on the boss. She literally said she'd feel guilty about ruining his career. So obviously she has a conscience. Obviously he's being an idiot. It would cost the company millions. She's a company woman. Yeah, she's literally going against her boss to make sure the company doesn't lose money. Now, even though I don't say that she's been there for 20 years, I do tell you that she's been there for a long time, if you're paying attention. And I don't baby my readers. It's in subtext. Does a first-year employee have access to the board of directors of a large company? No. You had to be there for a while if you're going to have access to the board of directors. So by throwing in the line that she could actually talk to them, I'm kind of letting you know that she's been around for a while. You don't need to know exactly how many years. It doesn't matter in this context. But don't force it. As you know, dialogue is horrible. As you know, Wren said to Finn, you and I are elfins, and elfins can eat only honey. And Finn is like, yeah, I know, I was born a stupid elfin. I'd love to have a stinking cheeseburger. Thanks for reminding me. This line happens a lot in sci-fi and fantasy, mostly. And it literally as dumb as writing, as you know, Drake said to Dylan, you and I are humans, and humans must breathe air. You would never say that to another person. Neither would an elfin say to another elfin that they only eat honey. Well, how do I let the reader know that, Drake? You show it to them. Maybe the elephants only eat honey. Maybe Drake is with the elephants and he's eating a cheeseburger and the other elephant goes, man, I'd love to have a bite. And he's like, yeah, you want a bite? Oh, I can't, it'll kill me. We literally can only consume honey. Now I'm using Drake as what's called an anchor character, where Drake doesn't know the information and he has to ask and get that information. Here's the thing. Nothing you write is real. Your characters aren't real, your world isn't real, your conflict isn't real, nothing is real. There's only one thing that is real in this equation, and that is the reader. So Drake doesn't need to know that elephants only eat honey. The reader needs to know that. I'm just using Drake as my stand-in. Every word you write is for the reader. It's not for your characters. I get that all the time where somebody's like, well, they write a scene that I've already seen in their book. I'm like, why'd you write this? I'm like, well, character A doesn't know this information. I got to give it to him. But the reader lived through it. Yeah, but character A doesn't know it. The character A is not real. Character A doesn't need to know it. The reader needs to know it, and they already know it. Don't repeat it. You can literally, if you need to give them the information, the character A knows it, then you just go, and then Drake told character A about the monster attack. Done. Is it a tale? Absolutely. Is it a good tale? Absolutely. Thing point 9, narration, however, going the other direction, can replace crappy dialogue. Narration can be a wonderful way of getting rid of weak telly dialogue that does not move the sentence, and there is a ton of it out there. This is actually where I see a lot of tells. They'll write something like, I'm so angry with you, Drake said to Dylan. Because I already said that dialogue hides tells when I was talking about the inner monologue. But that means that it's a trap. You'll start doing stuff like this and fall into that trap. Narration would be so much better to deliver this. Dylan sat timidly across the table from Drake, his eyes pleading for what? Forgiveness? Acceptance? Drake looked away, his jaws clenching as he glared out the window. You're experiencing the moment with Drake. I'm not having him just blurt out. Now, in the real world, do people all the time say, I'm so angry with you? Absolutely. But I don't want to read about those people. I'm here for entertainment and escapism and enjoyment. When I do my character building class and people are like, but I work with cardboard cutout characters. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to read about them. Like, yeah, they're in the office. I don't want to, that's not entertainment. So you got to work a little harder. Think point 10, don't be stupid with your speech tags. Speech tags can be useful tools for showing rather than telling your story. Unfortunately, most of the time, speech tags are used for tells. In the industry, they will tell you flat out, you can't use anything in your speech tags. Just use the word said, and that's it. They do that because they don't want to actually teach you how to do it. You don't have to do that. What you have to be is not stupid. Let's go, Drake said anxiously. The reason why I have to, again, add an ly adverb is because it's strengthening something else. Let's go doesn't say anything. Drake said doesn't say anything about the anxiousness of Drake. Again, to turn a tell into a show, we ask a question. So in this, what would it sound like or what would it look like for Drake to say something anxiously? So we can either look at the dialogue and say it in a way that the reader gets that it is anxious, or we could add something better to our speech tag. Let's go, Drake said, trying to glance in all directions at once. Now, I am one of the only professional authors that does not use a single speech tag in anything that I've ever written. Never will you read the word said unless it's in dialogue in anything that I write, ever. And I know I do it perfectly because there's not one stinking professional critic who's ever told me I did a good job at it. No one has ever even mentioned it. So obviously I'm doing it right. I'd like a little credit for it because it's actually very hard, and I do not recommend that you follow me on that. It would be really nice to write Drake said every once in a while. But I planted my flag in that like 20 years ago, and I've stuck with it. However, if you are writing a speech tag and it has anything in it other than the speech tag, cut the stupid speech tag because, again, it's adding nothing. There's no value to it. Why is a speech tag in there? The speech tag's job is to tell the reader who said the line. But if I wrote, let's go, period, Drake tried to glance in all directions at once. I'm saying the exact same thing without wasting words on the Drake said. If you have other things in the same line with your speech tag, cut the speech tag. These are called action tags. I don't like that term because it's not really an action tag, it's just a sentence. Put a period at the end of your dialogue and cut the speech tag. And just let that, because no one's going to confuse who said that. We all know Drake said that. He's in the paragraph with the dialogue. Thinking point 11, make it personal. This is the hardest concept to grasp about being a story writer. This is literally what this book is. This book goes through 8 chapters that explain everything I've been talking about here, plus a whole bunch more. But the last chapter is make it personal, because you need to know everything else to actually be able to do this. This is the hardest part of this. One of the hardest concepts to grasp about being a story writer is that you must make everything in your narrative personal to your POV. It is not about describing that wall with the blue lights on it. It's about describing that wall with the blue lights on it the way I see it. I'm your narrating character. How does that wall make me feel? That's how I want to describe it. Because my reader wants to experience the story through me. So it's not about describing the wall, it's about describing how I see, feel, react to the wall. And that makes a huge difference. So this means it doesn't matter what you think about the world around your POV. It matters what the character thinks. So as an example, I stood in the backyard. It was winter and snow covered the roof of the 2-story home I'd grown up in. The pool had been drained, the trampoline placed in storage. A foot of snow sat atop my father's old covered grill. The forest surrounding the house was filled with bare branches. The place felt as empty as my soul. Now that may read good to you, but it is not good. There is nothing in here that lets me know how the character feels about what they're experiencing. There's nothing personal. Instead, if you wrote, I stood in the backyard where I'd spent my entire childhood, the pool that housed the pirate battles and the sea monster attacks, the trampoline where I'd competed for Olympic gold, the surrounding forest I'd spent countless days exploring, pretending it was the deep, dark jungles of Africa, the grill my father used each summer to serve up burgers, chicken, and ribs tastier than any I'd had since leaving home. But all that were left now were the memories, cold and empty as the winter gripping the world around me. Snow covered the roof of the 2-story house, icicles lined its eaves, the pool had been drained, the trampoline placed in storage, a foot of snow sat atop the covered grill. The bare branch forest now as empty and lifeless as my soul. Now you actually feel something about this backyard. This is not a real story. This is literally all I've ever written. But through subtext, you get that there's a lot going on now. Like a lot of people, when I ask them this, I don't have time, but a lot of people, when we discuss it, they're like, oh yeah, obviously, this character was estranged from their father. They probably got in a huge fight, and now the father's dead, and they've returned home to their childhood home for the first time in 10 years, and they're really regretting that they couldn't apologize for it. I'm like, okay. I haven't written any of that, so maybe. All I do is describe a backyard in both scenes. There's no difference. But in one, it's personal. And I was actually thinking something along those lines when I wrote that, because you have to understand how your character's actually feeling to be able to write something like this, because it's about them experiencing the moment, not you experiencing the moment. So yes, I was thinking about that somebody was dead and that he was regretting it and so on and so forth, but I haven't written any of the stories. It's an example. So it's about making it personal. And just last thing really quickly, just to show you the difference and the reason why you're not writing in true third-person limited. True third-person limited is actually written like first person, just with third-person pronouns. That's why you're writing in what's called free indirect discourse, which is fine. Everybody should be writing in free indirect discourse. True third limited is insanely difficult to write. But if you look at the difference between these two, the only thing I switch is the pronouns. I don't change a single sentence between these two. They are the exact same. That is actually very difficult to do. That is a battle for another time. Thinking point 12, you absolutely should tell sometimes, because it's a balancing act. You can't write an entire novel that's one big show. Maybe one character recounts an event that another character's already read, or to another character the reader's already lived through, like I discussed earlier. We want to absolutely tell them that. Maybe they're doing something and they're traveling from one location to another, but nothing happens during that time. Do not force the reader to live through a boring moment. It's perfectly fine to say, and then they travel to Chicago, because nothing happens on the trip. Just go to Chicago, move the story, get it done. That is it. So I think I got like 30 seconds. Releasing Your Inner Dragon is the podcast. You can get my books out in the hall. Perk 50 if you want 50% off my big online class. And then, I thought I had a slide in there for the writer's room. If you really want to work with me on a weekly basis, I am very excited about the writer's room. I'm spending a lot of time in the writer's room. There's actually a lot of members here. We're doing a little dinner tonight because so many people from here are part of the writer's room. writersroom.us/20books. You can do 50% through February. I will also be here out in the common area, so during the rest of this, if anybody has any questions, you just want to sit down and pick my brain, ask me anything, go over your story, literally, I don't care what it is, I'm here, I'm just available for you guys. That's what I'm going to be here for the rest of the day. That's it. Get the card down there. And I'm sorry I spoke so fast. You might want to watch the video again.